welcome. I think we're going to go ahead and try to get started because I know we're all eager to hear our presenter for the evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Judith Russell, and I'm the president of SEPTA, the Special Education PTA. I'm thrilled to see so many new faces around the room. So if this is your first SEPTA meeting, I hope it's not your last. Our meetings are always open to the public, and we love getting a great parent response. So thank you all for coming. If the members of the SEPTA board that are here tonight, I know we had a few that weren't able to make it tonight, if you all could stand up so I could introduce you as well, that would be great. Okay, so let's see, we'll start over here. This is Claire again, she's our secretary. Melissa Wadman, she's in charge of our mini grants. We have Cara Abercrombie, our treasurer. Allison Castles, our VP of communication. And lots of, I think, special ed parent liaisons in the room, so thank you very much. And then if we could take a moment to introduce our lovely companions from the Parent Resource Center. Kathleen's in the back. She wants to wave her hand there. Kathleen Donovan. Kelly Mountain. For those of you who don't know Kelly and Kathleen, they are amazing resources in our community. If parents come to me with questions, probably my number one response is, have you talked to Kathleen and Kelly at the Parent Resource Center? Because they are just a wealth of knowledge and are a really great resource for our families. So if you have never been to the PRC, it's downstairs on the first floor of SciFax, and there's an awesome lending library, and you can make appointments and talk through all kinds of different topics with them. Did you want to say anything else about the Parent Resource Center?
We're very grateful to have SEPTA as our amazing partners, and Kelly and I feel like we have the very best jobs in the school district because we get to work with wonderful families like you and learn from you that are with you every day. So we meet one-to-one with families, we offer lots of learning opportunities. Kelly, we have an informational website, a Monday message.
A lot of times parents call in and say, gosh, I'm looking for a tutor or I need a psychologist, and we can't recommend, but we do have lists that we can supply to families, and most of the people on those lists are from folks like you or our staff, so feel free to call with any concerns or questions you have, and if we don't know, we'll try and get you hooked up with folks that do.
And we're also very excited. We have 2 new additions to our lending library, courtesy of Dr. Glasser. We're going to be introduced in a little while. Learning to be kind and understand differences, and learning to feel good and stay cool. So hurry down. These are going to be like those grab and go here on the library. Thank you, Dr. Glasser.
Yeah, thank you. And we are excited also to welcome Ms. Bridget Loft to our meeting. She is, for those of you who aren't familiar with Ms. Loft, she is our new, make sure I get it right, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. And she has come to us with over 25 years of experience in education. She most recently was the principal at Yorktown, and then has also been principal of Swanson, assistant principal of Swanson, and also assistant principal at Wakefield. Yeah? All right. And we're thrilled to have her. We're really, really excited that special education is now bundled under the Department of Teaching and Learning, and it's been a great thing since that change has happened. And so if you have a moment and want to just say a few words to the group, that would be great.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I want to echo my thanks for Kathleen and Kelly. And I would agree that as a principal, as a teacher, and now as an assistant superintendent, the collaboration between the Department of Instruction, Student Services, and Special Ed, having all of us under one umbrella really is both aesthetically nice, but more practically fabulous because we've got contact with one another and can really focus on all aspects of instruction and differentiation. So it's great. I would say I started my career in Arlington. I'm sort of full-on Arlington with the exception of a year of teaching in Miami-Dade, and then realized how great Arlington was and came running back to Arlington. So when I started my career as a social studies teacher at Wakefield, and one of my more formative experiences was co-teaching with a fabulous special ed teacher, where I really learned tremendous skills in differentiation and in co-planning, and I'm so grateful to her because we really evolved to model that there was no sort of main teacher and helper. We were very much partners with talk about kind of what's our foci moving forward, co-teaching is absolutely a focus as far as strengthening it throughout our schools and really systematizing expectations of a strong co-teaching model and providing support for our teachers. So absolutely, as we begin to move forward, I would say my top priorities are as follows. One is to really establish strong leadership in the the Office of Special Education. I think we're well on our way with the appointment of our two interim directors, Kelly Krug for elementary and Heather Rothenbuscher for secondary, and then our new supervisor of special education, Elizabeth Walsh. And so we've had a bit of a vacuum there for some months, and so I think we've got strong, smart folks who are committed to moving this ship forward and working in partnership with our teachers and our parents and our kids. So I could just check that one off the list, right? And move along. I think, as you all probably are aware, we are coming out of our program evaluation for special education and moving into creating action steps. And one of the main foci there is to enhance our inclusion models. And so Kelly and Heather have really been working particularly with our secondary, our middle and high schools to be looking at how do we set up a master schedule so that 80% of our kids spend 80% of their time in a general ed classroom, right? And so we're really working hard on that as well. And I think also making sure that our schools are, probably have heard this a lot, we're moving from a system of schools to a school system. And so what does that mean? I think it's really defining what are we tight about as a system, what do we hold each of our schools accountable for doing and working towards, and then what are we loose on, because we're so blessed, I think, in Arlington to have such a variety of foci. And so we're working through that as well. But in the meantime, I look forward to working with each of you, and I'm so grateful that we have SEPTA. I think it's a real resource to our community.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. Excellent. Okay, we're going to speed through the SEPTA portion because I know many of us are here for our speaker tonight. So just want to move through. We had a very successful summer activities fair at the end of January, and a special thank you to Melissa Craig, our VP of Events and Programming, for coordinating all of that. Our next monthly meeting is going to be Thursday, March 12th in this room here, and we're excited to let you know our topic is going to be on friendship building strategies. We have Lizette Uria from the Parent Educational Advocacy Training Center coming, and she's going to be doing a workshop with all of us on how to help our kids of all ages work on building friendships and sustaining friendships. So that'll be exciting. So that's next month on March 12th. We are having a couple events coming up. We have our appreciation breakfast for our transportation, so all the drivers and the assistants on every single bus in Arlington. We like to do a thank you breakfast every year. It's usually in March. It's actually most likely going to be in April. The transportation office has asked us to maybe do it on April 14th, so we're still tightening that up. But that's the Tuesday after spring break, so a nice welcome back to all of our drivers and assistants on the buses. It's a really fun event. If you think you might be able to help out that morning with bringing refreshments or helping to serve, there'll be some sign-ups going around for that coming up. Let's see here. We have our award ceremony is going to be in May, and we are looking for a few folks to help with that committee. It's not a heavy load. It's just figuring out what we want to work on in terms of tightening up our award nomination process, and Ms. Maria is going to be helping out with that as our chair for the award ceremony. So we don't need a chair, we just need a few other folks to kind of help out with that, but it's always a really neat event and a way to recognize the amazing staff that we have in Arlington. So if that's something that is of interest to you, you can let me know, or you can let Maria know that you'd like to help with that. And let's see here. We are already, I can believe, into February, and so believe it or not, we're actually thinking about next school year and who might be interested in serving on the SEPTA board. I cannot be president again next year. I've done it 2 years and then president-elect the year before that, and I have loved every second of it, but one of my sons has a lot going on health-wise. So it's time for me to pass the baton. So if you are interested or know someone who is, or think you might be able to elbow someone you think would be good at it, please consider it. There's also going to be several board positions opening up. So if you feel like you're great at something, there is a volunteer position for you. So we'll have more details about which positions we think will be open. And of course, even if it's not open and you'd like to still put your hat in, you can run for any position on the board. But like I said, we're always looking for volunteers. So one of the things we do need is a nominating committee, and it's usually 3 individuals. I think they have at least 1 or 2 that are already willing to do it again. It's a very easy lift. Basically, it's just trying to identify who might want to be on that slate of officers that you are, proposing for the board. Typically with SEPTA, we don't have too many exciting races where we're elbows in, mainly because we all have a lot going on. But if you think you might be interested in helping with the nominating committee, that would be awesome too. So lots of ways to get involved. I'll be hanging out after the meeting, so feel free to grab me if any of those strike your fancy. If we could go ahead and have a motion to approve December's meeting minutes. These were from the superintendent chat. They were posted by Clarette. Where is Clarette? There she is. Several weeks ago. So can I have a motion to pass the minutes? Great. Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Excellent. We will consider the minutes passed. Thank you so much, Clarette, for doing that. We don't have any January minutes because we had the summer activities fair in place of that, and so we can move forward now with our treasurer's report. And basically, this year the audit got kind of pushed a little bit late, and Cara can talk quickly through that, but we're in great shape in terms of our budget.
Yeah.
So she'll talk really quickly about where we are as a SEPTA in terms of our budget, and then we'll go through and check out the audit report, and we'll do a quick vote on that as well.
So I will give a very quick overview. There are copies of the budget on each table if you want to look more closely. We have a really outstanding community who have supported us very well. The highlights for this month are we ran our annual auction, online auction in December, and the proceeds coming in, we netted $11,500 in that auction, which far exceeded our anticipated income. So that's funded. That's enabled us the past month. We finally distributed our grants to special education teachers across Arlington. They've applied for mini grants. We have expended $7,600 thus far. We were also able to fund Child Find with about $1,000 in supplies for the Child Fund program. This will go up to about $9,000 by the next month's budget. So those are the big takeaways from the recent month. And so we are extremely healthy. We started the year with $2,600, and I don't think it's not showing up here. We started this fiscal year with about $26,000 in the bank, and we are presently at just north of $30,000. So people have suggestions for what SEPTA should be spending money on. We are open to suggestions.
Absolutely. Speaker ideas, all kinds of stuff.
So can we switch copies to the audit? So as Jana said, so typical PTA proceedings require that the audit be completed before the beginning of the fiscal year, which starts in July. Unfortunately, my predecessor ran into a few delays, including with our auditor, and it became a rather prolonged process. So with all due apologies, I want to quickly run you through the audit, and I'd like to request that we approve the audit this year. So this is the standard, I'm sorry, try not to talk this too much, form that is required of PTAs. There's a checklist that we must go through, noting that we've included all the required documentation. This is our treasurer's house where the audit was conducted, prior year's treasurer. We had followed all proper procedures where the budget was approved by the general membership at the beginning of the fiscal year. It was prepared by an executive board. We did present the budget at each meeting last year. There was at least one noted irregularity where we expended more than the budget had been anticipated. We do have a general standing rule: if we plan to spend more than $300 above what had been anticipated in the budget, we'll bring it back to general membership. So that's been noted. every bank statement was reconciled. Proper people were reconciling it. We kept PTA money separate from personal funds. We did not retain cash. We had 258 paid members last year. Still time to pay for your membership this year, if you haven't. We had proper receipts and invoices. We expensed, and I can validate this, last year's treasurer checked every expense against the bank statements. We do not allow signing of blank checks. We do not allow handling of cash, or keeping of cash for long periods of time. So the paperwork was all deemed up to date. So
Pretty
I'm
standard
happy to
audit.
answer any questions. I'm sorry to zip through this, but I know we want to actually get to our guest speakers. So, and all the funds were deposited promptly. And we have a standing 501c3 status, paid our, submitted our tax form. And we do not exploit children. No, sorry, this would be a little facetious, but we followed all the proper PTA procedures for our events, fundraising events and other events. Did not receive any corporate sponsorships, and we participated in all PTA training and learning. So that is last year's audit, and this was for July 2018 through June of 2019, just to clarify. So we have a motion to approve the audit.
Motion approved.
Second?
Second? All in favor?
Aye. Thank you very much.
Great, so we can say that the audit has been approved. We might still need to have signatures from two folks who are not on the SEPTA board, so if you have a minute to stay after, again, this was all done. What's the title of our auditor? Like, he's an actual, this is what he does for his business.
Gary Wells.
Yes, and so he's a professional auditor and does this out of the kindness of his heart. So we're grateful for it, and this year it took a little longer, but it's all good, so that's great. Thank you. Excellent, thank you, Cara.
Thank
All
you.
right, one last announcement that I forgot to mention earlier. We are still in need of a special education parent liaison at Oak Ridge Elementary. So if you're out there in the room and you are an Oak Ridge parent, and you're interested in finding out what I'm talking about, let me know. We try to have one or two parent liaisons at every single school in Arlington, so that if a family comes and they either have a new diagnosis, or they're new to school, or they just have questions about the special education process, they can talk to parents who have been in the trenches and who are part of their actual school community. It's a great group of parents. Even if you think, hey, my school has one or two, but I might be interested. Some schools have 3 or 4. So we usually do 2 trainings a year. It's not a heavy lift in terms of time, but it's a rewarding experience. And many of our liaisons are, raise your hand if you're a liaison. I think there's actually a lot of you here. So awesome. Let's give them a hand. Thank you. And our next liaison training is looking like it might be end of March. We'll be getting a date out to you all as soon as possible. So thank you. All right. I think without further ado, we are going to move into our special presentation with Dr. Glasser. She's a clinical psychologist who specializes in the treatment of children, adolescents, and their families. She's worked in private practice in the DC area for over 36 years. And over the course of her career, she's developed a special expertise in the diagnosis and treatment of ADHD and related issues and diagnoses. Dr. Glasser is the co-author, as we saw, of some wonderful books that are now going to be available in our parent resource library. And if you would like more information about her, she does have a website, which I think is linked to
JudithGlasser.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So without further ado, I'm going to let you get started. One thing I do want to just hit, because I know some of you, this might be your first SEPTA meeting, especially with guest speakers where we know there's, like we all are sitting here as parents and we have questions that are very personal to us about our specific cases. We really want to be mindful of confidentiality and everyone's time. So I think Dr. Glasser will speak to this, but you have note cards in front of you. If you think of questions throughout the presentation that you would like to ask but may not feel comfortable asking at the end, there's a box back there on the back table. You are welcome to add your questions there. And then many of you who RSVP'd on the Google form may have written out questions. We've received a lot of wonderful questions. And so Dr. Glasser is going to talk to you a little bit how she's worked to incorporate some of those right into her presentation and how she's going to handle those questions at the end. But we just ask that you kind of think about ways we can ask and phrase questions that might apply to not just like my student, if that's possible. I know it's hard. I have a million questions too. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Glasser.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear okay without microphones? Everything? Okay, cool. You all sent in amazing questions. I don't know how many of you sent them in, but the ones I got are, I was just blown away. And it's, I don't know if you, when you registered, many people filled out, asked questions. And I would like to make sure that I at least address them, because that's why you're here. I can't address specific clinical cases. This is not a substitute, as they say, for psychological advice from a, on an individual basis. But I'd like to kind of group the questions. And then what I'd like to do is go through, I've changed my presentation from what you have, at least a little bit, because what I decided to do was to make sure that I address these questions. And I will tell you before I begin that there were, I subgrouped them. So here are the subgroups, and this isn't all of them. Some of them, you may have asked a question that is not in one of these groups. But the subgroups came out to be behavior management at home and behavior management at school. The importance of accurate diagnosis, and what if there is a misdiagnosis? There has been. Handling of emotions, big emotions, meltdowns, that kind of thing. What is normal versus abnormal behavior? This one came up particularly with teenagers, which is really, that's a topic for a one-week seminar. And, it's a very, very good question, not easily answered. And in fact, then there were 5 questions related to hormonal changes in teenagers. And that is known, I'll just answer that one right off the bat, because we do know that the hormones change and it changes the entire chemistry of the brain. So yes, we do anticipate, that is very common. So those are the questions, and I think some of them will be addressed as part of the presentation, and some of them, what I'm going to do is make sure I address them more specifically towards the end. So what this is a topic of great passion for me. I have, over the course of my career as a psychologist, I see all different kinds of children who come with different presenting complaints, from depression, anxiety, and sometimes questions about ADHD and learning disabilities. And it has just, I can't tell you for how many years, I have just been fascinated with the coexistence. The term we first used to use was comorbidity, which I hated that term. It sounded like somebody was dying. Nobody's dying. And the fact is that I do want to also emphasize, before I even begin anything, that 1/3 of children with learning disabilities do not show signs of social and emotional distress. So this does not, the things I'm going to go through do not necessarily happen to everyone, okay? These are just common risk factors. So my goals for tonight, that I'd like to discuss are concern the impact of growing up with a learning disability, ADHD, a learning challenge is what I prefer to call it at this point. Because, challenges in learning. I think of strengths and struggles now, not even strengths and weaknesses, strengths and struggles, or strengths and challenges. We've all got them. I don't know about you, but in fact, I think so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is the emotional, social, and behavioral consequences of growing up with these kinds of learning challenges. And then I'm going to talk about some interventions that can help. And of course, that's another one-week seminar. But I will try to guide you to some other resources. I think I got particularly interested in this because I was a graduate student before I realized that I in fact have a learning disability and have one of those profiles. I probably also have ADHD, which you may yet see some of. But my impairment is on the left side of my brain. I'm sorry, on the right side of my brain. There we go. See, right there. The right side of your brain is the visual spatial part of the brain. It's involved in understanding north, south, east, and west. I have no clue right now. And I know I could tell you my husband could draw you a map in his head. I just have no sense of spatial relations at all. And it got documented when I was a graduate student and I was learning all the tests. When we learn to give the tests, somebody gives them to us first. And I scored in the organic range on spatial relations. Okay, borderline. But I can tell you that anybody that knows me well knows that this is true. And that if I did not have GPS, I would still be in Silver Spring, Maryland right now, somewhere wandering around the Beltway. Now I was fortunate because if you have a right side impairment like that with spatial relations, it doesn't show up much in school. It didn't show up really until I was in high school and I couldn't grasp with trigonometry cubes. I couldn't see spheres, just couldn't see them. I've gotten better at that with art training, so anyway, I can go off on that. But if you happen to be not fortunate and have it on the left side of your brain, which is the language center, that's what school is all about. That's reading and writing and even math. Everything is left hemisphere. Some of math is other places in the brain, including the visual spatial cortex. But the kids with left hemisphere, particularly those with language-based learning disabilities with dyslexia, if they're bright, get missed. And it's nobody's fault that they get missed. It really isn't. It's that oftentimes they learn to hide it and they mask it. And in fact, there is a book called The Pretenders in which there are some very good quotes about this. There's the imposter syndrome. Anyway, now I'm gonna launch into this, and let's assume that I am not too technology challenged. Okay. So the research has shown, and this goes back to the times of Samuel Orton, if that name is familiar, who Orton Gillingham. I mean, he's the kind of godfather, if you would, of dyslexia. It goes back to that time that the concern about the emotional behavioral consequences for children with learning disabilities has gone back to the beginnings. And what research has shown is that if a child doesn't learn to read fluently by age 8 or grade 3, approximately in that time frame, they often fail to develop a sense of self-efficacy in learning, which is the sense that I can do it. And that can then impact the rest of their learning. Now, some kids will figure it out on their own, but what they have also found is that children who are going to learn to read are going to learn to read. It doesn't, I'm not an educational specialist, but and there are many different strategies for teaching children to read. But for some children, it comes very easily. Children with dyslexia, however, it doesn't. And they have difficulty understanding the sounds that letters make, which is called phonological processing, and that is the underpinning of dyslexia. It is the myth of dyslexia is that it has to do with reversals of letters. So that's one thing I like to address. Some of those kids do that, but anyway, I can give a week-long lecture on dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities, but I won't. So this lack of self-efficacy, the lack that that I don't think I can be an effective learner, that can set things awry unless there's intervention. So it's predictive of lack of persistence on new learning tasks. Now, again, let's keep in mind this doesn't happen to everybody. Because you don't learn to read fluently by age 8 does not mean you're doomed, okay? There are interventions that can be done, that are done even with adults. There's fascinating stuff, research going on at Georgetown University, and I think Johns Hopkins also. Yale, up at Yale, they have a dyslexia research center up there. So there are interventions. You are not doomed, okay? I don't want to give that thought. But it does make it more difficult for these children to learn to read and write, and by doing that, by not reading for pleasure and reading fluently, you may not develop your vocabulary. Some other things do not develop, and it can set you behind. It also, I have seen many situations where it impacts the difficulty with any learning challenge. There are a number of different learning disabilities. I do tend to focus a little bit on dyslexia. I'm not sure how that has come to be since early on, I consider myself, I am a specialist in ADHD. There are many other kinds of learning disabilities. Dyslexia links to dysgraphia, so difficulties with writing, with spelling, and then you combine that with ADHD, that is a particularly problematic or difficult combination. I guess I find dyslexia is often hidden. It's so masked that I have made that diagnosis in 15, 16-year-olds, and it's just amazing to me how they hide it. Whereas ADHD tends to be more out there, except in girls. In girls, we are good little girls, and we often are eager to please. And I don't mean to be sexist, but this is what our research literature tells us. And we tend to be the chatty Cathys, which is what I was, or the daydreamers. So we tend to fall through the cracks. But what we do know is that self-esteem can be impacted by having these kinds of learning disabilities. And I know that that was the case for me. With my visual spatial impairment, I never understood it. And even to this day, it can embarrass me terribly. I can tell you that if I go out here to try to get back to my car, I may get lost. That's pathetic. That's how I feel, okay? There you saw it, low self-esteem. If you follow me, I have learned coping techniques. That's a small thing. Imagine you're a kid in school and you've been called on to read out loud and you don't know what these letters sound, you don't know how to sound out unfamiliar words. And that can certainly impact how a child sees themselves. And right now I'm dealing with a child who's being made fun of by classmates, through no fault of anybody's. It's just that, you're stupid, you're slow, you're retarded, you're in the low reading group, all those kinds of things. I'm not sure, and he's feeling terrible about himself. And there are links between self-esteem and school performance. So these are issues I really feel strongly that need to be addressed. And I know the schools are taking great, making efforts to do so in an era of limited resources. So these are some of the emotional issues that can arise secondarily to having ADHD or a learning disability. And I'm going to go through these in a little more detail. I will say that I'd like to comment on the fact that I think having ADHD with something else, which by the way, ADHD rarely occurs by itself. It usually occurs with something else. And it's important to figure out what that is. We think it's on the same gene with some of the other kinds of things, like depression and learning disabilities. Dyslexia, for example, is a genetic condition, disorder. But if you've got ADHD, then one of the hallmark features is that you have difficulty with tasks that require sustained mental effort. In my opinion, that is one of the hallmark symptoms of ADHD. Difficulty with tasks that require sustained mental effort. It's one of the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. Now, if I have difficulty, let's say, with sounding out unfamiliar words, that is a task that's going to require sustained mental effort, more than for other people. You put those two together, this is a case of where 2 and 2 does not equal 4. Excuse me, educators, but 2 and 2 in this case equals some astronomical figure, where you can't concentrate and you need to be able to really concentrate. So that is, I think that's where some of the anxiety comes from, the self-blame, the shame, the frustration. Kids that will be doing their homework and throw the book across the floor. And some of you did mention anger as an issue, as a question. So now I'd like to go through, am I going too fast? Is this?
No, right.
It's okay? Okay, all right. So the increased self-blame is something that I hear so often. I have written a couple of articles on this subject, and they actually are, I think one of them's on my homepage, which is one of my favorites that I ever wrote. So it was about this topic. And there was a little boy in my office, and he had just said to me when I started, I'll never forget him, you know, it's the strangest thing. It's like, I'm always the last one to turn in my work. I'm always getting into trouble. I don't mean to. I don't know what's wrong. I'm always getting yelled at, and I just feel so terrible, and I don't know what to do. And I mean, he was saying all this, and fortunately his mom was there and heard it, so that we could, then we had our work cut out for us to help him. But he had dyslexia and ADHD, and that combination, as I've said, is I think those kids are particularly vulnerable. And so he was saying, he said, I'm stupid and I'm no good at schoolwork. That is a quote from him. So it's okay, come on in. It's okay.
There's a seat right here.
Yep. So intense shame is a very common feeling among children with these kinds of issues, with learning challenges. Shame is such a powerful emotion, and you can see it with them when they cover their work if I'm asking them to spell. Or sometimes they'll take their long hair and put it in front of their faces. And you can just, those are signs, nonverbal signs of the shame that they're feeling inside. And then there's the imposter syndrome, which, where they will, I've seen many children who will try to hide, to pretend that they can do what you're asking them to do. And they try very hard. I've done a school observation where I witnessed the boy who I was there to observe copying his neighbor's math work. You could just see him glancing over because he couldn't do it. But you know, the teacher's got 30 kids in there and may not be aware of it. Every time I visit the schools, by the way, in classroom, I think we don't pay our teachers enough. Amen. Right, exactly. I mean, that's a really hard job. But so, anyway, but I could see him. I could see exactly what he was doing, but nobody was aware that he was doing this. So he was pretending. And kids will memorize books to pretend that they can read. So, one question, and this actually came up as one of the questions, I think, that somebody asked, which is, which comes first? Are these emotional issues, the self-blame, lowered sense of self-efficacy, are these secondary to the learning? Are the emotional issues secondary to the learning challenges? Is the child having difficulty learning due to the emotional challenges? Are there coexisting conditions? How do we know what comes first? What do we treat, and in what order? And the answer is yes. You can certainly have difficulty learning due to emotional challenges. Depression clouds the brain, and people can't think very well. Anxiety. You need enough anxiety to make us work to learn, but too much anxiety makes it that part of the brain that works and learns and thinks doesn't work it very well, can't work very well. I can do a whole lecture on that, so, which is it's actually a fascinating topic. There can be coexisting conditions, as I've mentioned. How do we know what comes first? We don't. We don't. Many of these things are genetic. In my field, we talk about the biopsychosocial model of development of these kind of problems, which is the biological, so the genetics, the psychological factors, and then the society, the greater world in which they live. I think, so we sometimes never know why. But it's not because, more than likely not because you dropped the baby when the baby was little. It's, yeah, right, exactly. And it's not usually due to birth complications except in specific people.
You just talk louder, your voice keeps going
Oh.
down, hard to hear.
I'm
There's
sorry.
a fan over there too, so it's
You were
right
good
there.
at the beginning, but you keep dropping down.
I'm recovering from bronchitis,
Oh,
so
no. Okay.
I will please raise your hand again if you lose me, okay? I'll get a sip of water. Thank you for letting me know. What's that?
You want to stand in the middle, I'm happy to flip your slides.
Does the laptop move or?
Yeah,
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good. This is a good placement for me, but I will try to,
Dr. Glasser, there's a slide advancer there too on the laptop if the picture works.
There's a clicker if you want.
I know, this is a problem. Old fashioned. I see what you're saying though, if I did that, then moved over there, then I might. Okay. I think we're gonna go this way. What time are we at? A quarter hour. I just wanted to play this for you. I know my tech person, you had this playing. But I don't know how you did it. This is just a short clip that I found interesting. Okay. Thank you. I will try to come to the 21st century. It's not essential, so don't go to too much. You did it before, so,
It was the submit slide.
yeah.
There's a play button on the bottom.
Oh, I
I
see.
think that's just the slide.
Yeah. Okay, it's in your, that's all right. No,
We could
that's
just
okay.
have
to look it up on Google.
You can, yeah, it's just.
The address.
That's
Maybe
okay.
link it, the link might be behind the picture.
The link might be behind the
Uh-huh.
picture.
Can we see if there's any questions?
No, let's just, I'm gonna keep going. Okay. I'm going to see if my spatial relations will let me switch. This is called cognitive flexibility. Can I be flexible? This is linked to ADHD. It is, I'm being absolutely serious here, so we are gonna see if I can be flexible. So, let's see. So this is somebody who's telling her own story of what it was like for her growing up. And I think she tells it extremely well. So if you are interested, just type in that It's from a very good website, the NCLD National Center for Learning Disabilities organization. It's from their website, and they're a very good organization. I think something got I got something out of order. Okay. So the way I don't know if any of you are familiar with Ross Green, collaborative problem solving. He's done some very, very good work. He has a website, Lives in the Balance. He's very interested in these issues. And he talks about reframing the problem. So the problem, by the time families get to my office, there's often a very intense level of anger. There's parents, understandably, and I am a mom, get angry when their kids' grades are falling. It's the grades that typically will often bring them into my office. And so we first have to deal with the anger. And so my goal is to help reframe the problem. This is where sometimes you'll think that your child is being lazy, just lazy. I hear that, and us professionals have heard that. In fact, there's a book, I think, I'm Not Lazy. Anyway, I don't remember the title. I think it's Mel Levine wrote that book. He's discredited it, but his books are still good. Does anybody know that story?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
We won't go there. Anyway, I often find that that's what it looks like, is that, it's taking the child 2 to 3 hours to do their homework at night, they're having major meltdowns, nobody knows what to do. I think that was on my list of questions, was, what to do about homework struggles. And sometimes the homework struggles are because the child has been sitting for 6.5 hours all day long, having to do something that they have difficulty doing. Then they have to come home and do more of it. And if you put me in a situation where for 6.5 hours I had to try to find my way out of a maze, and then told me that night I had to do some more of finding my way out of a maze, I can tell you that I would become extremely depressed and angry and frustrated and might start throwing things. It would not be pretty. So, put the child in a situation. So that's where I think we have to reframe the problem or look at the problem differently. In the research, we know that how we think about things directly affects how we feel about them. So if in therapy, that's called cognitive behavior therapy. If you can think about things differently, you can change how you feel, and then you can change your actions. You can change how you behave. And that's what, by reframing, what I mean. So if we can think about the problem as not anybody's fault, this is a very fault-finding society, and I don't find blame is useless. It's a useless enterprise to me. I don't see any point in pointing blame. Let's figure out if the child has, these are Ross Green's words, what are the lagging, if a child wants to do well if they can. If the child is not doing well, then there are lagging skills or unsolved problems. So it's our job as adults to figure out what are the lagging skills and or the unsolved problems, and then try to do something about that. And then our intervention at that point is likely to be different. We're likely to not offer, say, perhaps rewards and punishments for getting homework done. We're less likely to scold. We're less likely to name call. You're lazy, that's what I mean by name calling. And more likely to try to intervene in a positive direction. So I'll go through just some of the common feelings that arise. I've addressed them all a little bit, and why we get them. the anger and frustration. I think about this, just failing to meet expectations on a daily basis. This is a good one. Being told, and this I hear all the time, that you just need to work harder. You're not working up to your potential. I have to tell you that gifted kids call it the P word, because they're always told they're not working up to their potential. They hate it. And that's what it looks like to grown-ups. That's what it looks like to teachers and parents and all the rest of us. So being told to work harder when they're working as hard as they can. One of the books for children's on this topic, which I will think of, is shows a child bicycling uphill. And that's what it's like for these children, is they're bicycling uphill all day long. And then they can be told that they're not working hard enough. And it's like, what kind of frustration would that cause? These, for some reason, these children tend to get picked on. They're often victims of bullies. I don't quite understand that. I've studied bullies for 36 years. Mostly I've studied victims of bullies for 36 years. Even with our best intentions of the no bullying zones and no bullying curriculum, they exist. And in my office yesterday, this little boy was telling me what I already know, which is that the kids do it on the playground and at lunch when there's nobody around. And they act goody-goody in front of the adults, and then, and somebody in one of your questions asked me what to do about recess when it's kind of, there's no supervision. And I've observed recess at many schools. And there are aides out there in general. I don't know about in Arlington County Public Schools, and I'm not meaning to be critical. But it looks to be like where I've observed in Montgomery County and Fairfax County, like a free-for-all. And the aides that are out there are talking to each other. And the kids are out there and generally, oftentimes, not being very nice. I mean, they have their own groups, but some of them are getting bullied. And these children with these kinds of learning issues are, it's like the bullies know. They just know they can get to them. And so these kids get publicly humiliated often, and that's a lot of the places where anger and frustration come from. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that anger can be a symptom of depression in kids and in teens. Kids and teens do not show often, do not always, I'll go with often, show depression the same way adults do. For adults, the symptoms of depression you might see, not enjoying anything, being in bed all the time, feeling down all the time, loss of interest in things that were previously interesting, loss of appetite, loss of difficulty sleeping. Those might be the signs that we think of, and those would be a severe depression even in an adult. But in a child and in a teen, it doesn't always show up that way. And I have many parents who are very surprised when I tell them their teen is depressed because, well, she looks so happy with her friends. Yes, that's the only time she's happy, is with her friends. A lot of the kids are telling me now, well, one boy in particular right now has expressed it so beautifully, that video games are the only way he can get his mind off his unhappy thoughts. So I've also gotten very interested in what we are calling the addiction to video games. And I haven't made up my mind whether I actually like that we're calling it an addiction. There are pros and cons. But I think that I wonder how many of our kids are getting caught up in that because it actually does work on the pleasure center of the brain. We do know that it's helping them to feel better. Just like food can help some people feel better, sugar increases serotonin in the brain for 3 minutes. It doesn't really work for a long time. But that can lead to overeating, which, you know. So we know that negative thinking can lead to depression. We know that depression can lead to negative thinking. And for these children with learning challenges, it is, they have they can have a lot of negative thinking. The other thing is there are children with very specific language-based learning disabilities. Again, this left hemisphere, not dyslexia, but the broader issues of having difficulty. You could have expressive language disorders, which is where you have difficulty putting your thoughts into words, or receptive, where you have difficulty understanding what people are saying, or both. And the teens particularly that I've seen who have difficulty putting thoughts into words also have difficulty putting emotions into words. So they can't tell you how they feel. There's a specific kind of learning disability where people have difficulty labeling their emotions. And, but I am working with a 24-year-old right now who has always had difficulty talking about, she can't talk about what it feels like. She initially didn't even know what I meant. So that leads to depression because can lead to depression because if you can't talk about these feelings and thoughts, they get internalized. You keep them inside. And then when you keep them inside, they just fester like a wound. High anxiety is also associated with difficulty with reading, writing, and arithmetic. I think girls with math anxiety, I'm hoping that that's lessening now in this age of STEM, but that was typically a problem, but anxiety interferes with the ability to learn. There's no question. And if something is difficult for us, we get anxious about doing it. So I actually may get a little anxious when I leave going back to try to get my car. And I'm serious, okay, because this really shows. High anxiety affects working memory. Working memory is associated with ADHD. It's one of these executive functions you've probably all heard about. It's the ability to hold information in your head and manipulate it at the same time. So an example is if I read you a string of numbers and ask you to tell them to me backwards, you've got to hold the numbers in your head while you reverse them. So anxiety, we find, interferes with that. Working memory is necessary for every academic task there is. If you're reading, you've got to keep in mind what you have read, what you are reading, and then maybe thinking about what you are going to be, what's going to happen if you're writing the same thing. Math word problems are all about active working memory. And so working memory difficulties are often part of the processing deficits that children have when they have learning struggles, which cause anxiety. Social problems I've already alluded to. I'm not even talking here about the more severe kinds of problems such as autism. Somebody did mention autism in a question. That's very dear to my heart. Knowing many people who I care about deeply who have autism, it's a more severe form of social problem and genetically linked. So I'm not going to specifically address autism. That's another. I feel like it is a learning challenge certainly, but those kinds of social problems are even different and more difficult to deal with. I think than the general ones that our kids with learning challenges have. If anybody does want to know more about, I think Autism Speaks is a good organization, And for more information about addressing social issues, I really love the website socialthinking.com. I think Michelle Garcia Winter has done some brilliant work in that area. Socialthinking.com. And I think I do have a blackboard if I need to, or a whiteboard. But let's take the generic, if there is one, child with a learning challenges. They may have social problems for many different reasons. If you have language-based learning disabilities, you may have difficulty keeping up in a group. Your peer group is just chatting away like this, and you can't keep up. And that I've seen happen, and it makes kids get isolated. They may have difficulty not on the autism spectrum, but many kids with ADHD have difficulty reading nonverbal cues. And oftentimes people with right hemisphere problems will have difficulty reading nonverbal cues. Somehow I didn't get that, but I got fortunate in that. And I think I've addressed, the other thing is kids with ADHD are, in terms of their maturity level, are about, this is Russell Barkley, who's an expert in the field, has estimated they're approximately 1/3 as mature as their chronological age. So think about this for a moment when you think about putting a 16-year-old behind the wheel of a car when they have ADHD, okay? You are really putting like a 12-year-old who's distractible and impulsive. The research, I'm getting a little off topic here, but that's a concern that I have. But they do act younger than their same age peers. And many of the young adults with ADHD who I've talked to agree with this, that when they're 30, they're 20. And but you can imagine how that would affect a 12-year-old in school who's acting like an 8-year-old, or maybe gets along better with the 8-year-olds. Family problems are another big issue. Am I doing okay on that? Okay. Sibling rivalry may be more intense than even is usually the case. I have seen this. I have seen so frequently, and it just doesn't seem fair to me, that there's a child who's got lots of challenges, and then there's another child who's the golden child. The one who is the straight A student with no effort, who has all kinds of friends, and then the other one has all the behavior challenges and has difficulty in school. And it doesn't seem fair. It's not always the case, but I've seen it. And you can imagine what kinds of things, that sounds familiar to some, that it sets up, what kind of problems that you can find where the child who has the difficulties is very jealous of the one that doesn't. On the other hand, the child who doesn't have the difficulties doesn't get as much attention and can get very angry and very frustrated and very jealous because that child's taking all of the time in the family. Gets all the time, I'm here doing my work, doing what I'm supposed to do, and he's getting all that attention. It may not come out that way, and they may not, one child may also try to be extra good, be really goody-goody, not to, because they know that the other child just causing so much stress in the family. And parents often don't understand the reasons for these kinds of issues. There's another big issue, I think, in terms of family dynamics and family problems, which is that many of these issues are genetic, as I said. So I can't tell you the number of times where I've made a diagnosis of ADHD, and I do my diagnostic work very thoroughly and carefully. I don't make that diagnosis very easily, especially after all the research and newspaper articles. And then the parents will, once they read the criteria, say, well, that sounds just like me. And then it turns out that one or both parents has ADHD. I don't mean has it like a disease, no. And now we've got a bigger problem because it turns out the household's in chaos. So children with ADHD would benefit from a lot of structure and routine, and these are parents who can't provide it. And that becomes a very difficult situation and can cause family problems. It's also particularly difficult for marriages where one partner has ADHD and the other one doesn't, and doesn't realize it. Sometimes, once the diagnosis is made, there can be more understanding and forgiveness of why my husband keeps forgetting to bring home whatever I ask him to bring home, even if I send him a text message. So, and then if you have, I've heard many mothers say, my husband has ADHD, my son has ADHD, I feel like I've got 2 kids. And having to be the organizer for the entire family can be exhausting. And sometimes, I'm being sexist here, I'm sorry, I know there's men here in the room, it can be the other way around. And I've seen that too, where mom has ADHD, dad doesn't. And it is equally difficult and equally frustrating. So I'm not sure why I'm picking on you guys. It's not fair. The other thing is with, I've found other situations with dyslexia, for example, where I've made the diagnosis, I've educated people as to what it is. I found an entire family going back to grandparents who it turned out got themselves diagnosed. And there was just a lot of more self-understanding. When you understand, there can be forgiveness. Okay, so let's get to behavior problems. This was a question that was asked many times. So feeling unsuccessful in school can lead to many different kinds of behaviors. If you have ADHD, if you've ever observed a child with ADHD in a classroom, you will see that they sit in all kinds of uncomfortable positions, which I think is a way of keeping the mind awake. I've had kids laying on the floor in classrooms where there's a lot of flexibility tolerated. Some teachers can be more flexible than others just because we're humans. Children who feel unsuccessful and don't understand what's being taught, either because they have a language-based learning disability, they have ADHD and can't concentrate, they will often act like a class clown and get a lot of negative attention and make everybody laugh and disrupt everybody. And some of the behaviors can include oppositional and defiant behaviors, refusing to do. And now, strategies for intervention for these kinds of issues was a major topic of questions. I am going to breeze through I think I'm going to skip ahead now. 8:15 and I have until 9? We're doing okay. Oh, good. Okay. Questions? No. Okay, all right. I'm gonna get to this. But before I go on to that part, since I've brought it up already, I want to say several caveats here. I don't have all the answers. No one has all the answers. There to how to manage these kinds of problems, or any of the ones that I'm mentioning. There is no one right way to raise a child. There are lots of theories out there. There are tremendous numbers of books on parenting, on behavior management. I've taken workshops and workshops and workshops. And every one of them I say, oh yeah, this is great. And it's great for some kids. But there's no one way to do this. So I'm not going to be able to give you all the answers on this. I will give you some of my thoughts over these years. So I'm going to come back to this. I'll leave it at that now. All right, so we're going to skip this exercise because it will take too much time, and I prefer to leave times. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for just a moment to see if anybody has any questions addressing what I've covered so far before I go into some interventions. Does anybody have any questions, or has anybody put anything in the box? Yes.
This has to do with sibling rivalry.
Mhm.
Do you ever bring in both siblings to a session to help talk through issues?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do. With more or less success. Yes. And sometimes it has been very, very helpful. I do also think that family therapy, having everybody in the room, can be extremely helpful. I have found in many situations where I've done that, that parents learn a lot about their children when they see them, when they see the dynamics between kids in the office. So I think that's a very powerful, and I think it's very powerful that everybody understand what's going on, that what we call psychoeducation, education about what even the sibling needs to understand. There used to be a book, I think it's still around, for the siblings of kids with ADHD, and I think it was called My Brothers Are World Class Pain in the and I had one little girl who we gave that book, and she finally understood her brother. She finally understood why he would jiggle his leg through the entire TV show and drive her crazy. So understanding is that kind of reframing the problem I talked about that can help at least diminish anger. So I like to have siblings, where possible, understand. Somebody else had a question. Yes.
What we have found in our experience is that a lot of times my husband and I were the problem. And I know, talking to other parents with kids with disabilities, that is true, just an observation. So how often do you spend time with the parents in those situations? Because we can throw our kids in therapy all we want to, but if the parent is the root cause and we're adding that behavior, then where are we getting? Like, yeah, I know, this is a journey. I'm on this journey with
I
everybody
applaud you.
else.
I applaud you. I will work with parents whenever I can get them in. But the hard part is getting them in. Even where they've seen it's been effective. I
Change
just,
is hard. Change is hard for parents. I mean, like, we've got 30, 40 plus years ingrained in us.
right. And this requires a lot of work. I will tell you, and I'm telling you that there's all these programs out there, and I'm not touting one over the other. However, I just took an all-day training in 1-2-3 Magic. I'll get to you, I promise, okay? I don't know if anybody's familiar with 1-2-3 Magic. I know that some people, one of my colleagues today said, okay, need some tweaks. Well, I was impressed. I have to say, I was impressed. And what I would actually really love to do, because I might be able to get people in for this, would be to do like 2 or 3 sessions, like in a group training, just training this basic counting technique that is actually the research based. The research has found it works. And sure, maybe it needs tweaking. There's other research-based parenting programs that work. But yes, teaching parenting is critical. In the old days, even before I started in private practice, we used to have what were called child guidance clinics. And in child guidance clinics, the child would be in therapy and the parents would be getting some kind of therapy. And then the two therapists could talk to each other. Now, I'm not necessarily saying parents need therapy, but kids don't come with an instruction manual. Did you notice this? I just held my new baby granddaughter, who's 1 week old today. I held her last night for the first time. And there's this tiny little bundle, and there's no instruction manual. And, you know, she's got a 2-year-old brother who is struggling, and this is going to be interesting. But, you know, so they don't come with an instruction manual. There's no right way to do it. We're not taught. The tendency we have is to do what our parents did, which sometimes was a good thing, sometimes may not have been. And if it was, in the cases where the parents did a really good job, I find that the kids want to live up to that, and that's hard. On the other hand, if your parents, you don't feel, did such a good job, then it's really hard work to turn it around, to try to do it differently. It's like you're swimming upstream against a tide, particularly if there's any kind of history of abuse. It takes a lot of work to not do that, to overcome that. So, yes, I would love to get parents in more often. In particular, I will say, and I'm not picking on you this time, it is true, it's very hard to get dads in. Very hard to get dads. Even where where both parents may have a job of equal pay and equal stature, the moms are the ones that make the phone calls and come in. Not 100% of the time, but a large number of times. I would like to get both parents in, because it's really important for parenting for parents to work as a team. That's from what I've read. Does that kind of address you?
I share that because I think that's part of the frustration for parents is they don't know how to solve these problems. And oftentimes we do have the skills to be able to do that.
Yes.
And, you know, like I said, this has been a journey for us, and my husband did suffer great trauma as a child. So to overcome that has been a great challenge for him and for us as a unit.
Yep.
And so there's other people here that are probably experiencing that.
Yep. And I also know that with 2-parent working families, I know many times it's hard for the parents to even find time to talk to each other, just to kind of make plans, systems, put them in place. So yeah, it's yes, the parenting is a critical aspect of this. But one thing you said I want to come back to is that I think you said at the very beginning something about that if we're the cause of the problem.
Yeah.
I don't like to lay blame.
I don't blame.
Okay? You're doing the best you can. You are, and your husband is. Now, maybe there are things to be learned and you can do better. Okay. I call that continuing education. But blame, because that's negative self-attributions, and that can lead you to feel like you can't do it. And that's the opposite of what we want. You've done a good job, even recognizing that. Okay, now your question.
I had a question about, you mentioned anger being a symptom of depression in kids. Can you talk about any other symptoms that might not be like what you would see in an adult depression versus what you would see in a kid?
Very good question. the kids I know who suffered from depression. They, should I think about that when I come back to
Sure.
it? I'm thinking, I've got teens in my head, and I've got kids in my head, and boys versus girls, that's what's, so it's not an easy answer. But I think, certainly withdrawal from things that they previously liked to do. Now that's, you will see with grown-ups, but it can be more noticeable with kids. No, I don't wanna play soccer anymore. Boring. When I hear that word boring. Oftentimes they might not lose their appetites. They might not show difficulty sleeping. If they have ADHD, they might show difficulty sleeping anyway. Isolation, not wanting to be with friends. If grades are taking a slide where they didn't used to, that can be, to me, if grades start taking a nosedive, that's like you've got a child with a fever of 101. You don't know why, but there's something wrong. Those are the, so isolation, loss of interest in previous, things you previously enjoyed. I think it's the down mood you might not see. That's probably gonna be the main difference. It may come out as anger and irritability. More.
I'll throw one. In our experience, with a teenager was rigidity too.
Oh,
Just not to be specific, it was like our cognitive behavior therapist was like, well, I think some of this is actually depression. So similarly, that was something that was, intuitive for us.
yeah.
The anger and the frustration, and then that rigidity was part of it too, like not wanting things to change, not wanting to give.
How interesting.
It was interesting for us.
Yeah, that was interesting for me.
Yeah, she's in therapy. We're working on it.
Okay, all right, yeah, we're all works in progress, right? Was there anything else before I go on? Go ahead.
I'm gonna share something personal. I have suffered a lot from bullying when I was in school.
From a bullying, I'm sorry.
So I know that feeling. I always didn't, if I have family later on, I didn't want these kind of things for my kids. But that's why I'm here today, because
found about parenting was to see my child be bullied, be a victim, and that was just like a knife in the gut. And it is true that when your children reach a certain age where you are having problems, those just come right back at you. I will, let's address interventions. I have tried for a long time to find appropriate interventions for dealing with bullies. Is that, I don't think that's me, okay. Does that mean something?
Nope.
Okay.
Maybe on the
Oh, okay. The most effective, I work with kids all the time, including last night, on how to handle bullies. The best strategy that I have found is assertiveness. And teaching kids to be assertive, teaching people to be assertive. That's the best antidote to depression, to anxiety, to social problems, is to learn to be assertive. Now, assertive is different than aggressive, but it's not passive. So passive is doing nothing and letting the bully walk all over you, or giving him your lunch money. Aggressive would be punching him in the gut. Assertive is standing up for yourself. And I find that a lot of the kids I work with have trouble doing that. So to be assertive means to use I sentences. And there was a book, I don't know if it's still in print, called Assertive Parenting. There's also a book called, there's a lot of books on assertiveness. There were some very good books for teaching kids assertiveness. But if you learn it yourself, you can teach it. And the best book on assertiveness that I know of is called Your Perfect Right.
Your perfect right.
Your perfect right. It is your right to stand up for yourself. And I did my master's thesis on this topic, and I still find it of great interest. It's not easy to master, but what it involves is using I sentences. I think, I feel, I want, I need. Now, so to the bully, how do we stand up to a bully? We've got to teach, and I know of children with autism who are learning this. Like, stop if you can't speak. Stop. Stop doing that. And then walk away. Teaching a child to ignore a bully doesn't work. I will tell you that. It is the number one thing we tell kids to do is ignore the bully. It doesn't work. It sounds good, but the child has to learn how to stand up for themselves and show the bully and stand firm. So assertiveness, a bully doesn't, I've gone through this a lot where I've said to kids, well, tell them, I don't like it when you do that. Well, a bully's just gonna laugh at me if I say that, So we have to live in the real world. So that's where it requires some thought and some working. I do role playing with the kids to role play out. Well, what do you think the other one's gonna say if you do if you say stop? What do you think that I don't know, Jimmy's gonna do if you do that? And then let your child tell you, and believe him. Believe him. Don't say, please don't say no. He would never do that. Sometimes we want to say, go get an adult. That's a good thing to do. We do teach kids to go get an adult. I hear that sometimes that makes it worse. That then the child gets bullied for being a tattletale. Or you're on the playground, and as I've said, sometimes, you know, it's, the adults may not even know what to do on the playground. This is also, if a lot of this is going on at school, I do believe firmly in the school-home partnership. So if this stuff is going on at school, it has to come to the attention of school authorities, school people, to get help. I don't know, but it may be, I have a situation right now where there's one girl who's tormenting an entire class. And we are having to deal with it, with the school. And of course, she's doing it when nobody is around to see her.
What is the school, how is the school responding? Because that's my biggest concern is the school response to
This school is responding very positively and trying. And what the little boy is telling me is that the teachers still aren't seeing it. So, I haven't quite figured out, this is recent, so I haven't quite figured out, I may yet make a phone call. Because if teachers can't know all of what's going on. But I do find that we at least need to try. The schools need, teachers and principals need to know. Are there any teachers or principals here?
No, but I just had a recent incident of that with my child, and the way I approached it seemed to nip it in the bud. And the surprising thing, there were supposed to be his so-called friends that were bullying him, and my child's on the spectrum, so he's also worried about losing the friends that he has. So he kind of just like lets them walk over him. But he was coming home upset and crying. Initially, like gave him, told him the things that he needed to do to see if he can work it out on his own. But when he continued, I think, what I did was I contacted the parents, not in a defensive way,
Right.
but so luckily, I met these parents at a birthday party, so I kind of knew them, but just we were at the same birthday party. So give the other parent the opportunity to deal with their child, explain what's going on, in a kind of just saying my son or my child's coming home because he's upset because whatever the child's name is, he said that he's been teasing him or whatever or doing this, and I was wondering if you talk to your child about it.
That is
And I gave the parents opportunity to
Yeah.
deal with their child first, and if that doesn't resolve, I also informed the teacher about what was going on. And if that doesn't solve it, then escalate to the principals. I think it's maybe having the other parent deal with their child about it. And they will
Sometimes that-
apologize and things resolve
And
itself.
sometimes, unfortunately, can backfire.
Yeah.
Which is where I do like to have, the schools will sometimes have a meeting. But-
Susie and Johnny are perfect.
Right. Yeah. One more question and then I'm gonna move on. You have, right.
I didn't have a question. I was gonna say that my approach also of calling out a parent is saying, hey, can you ask your child what my child might have done in this situation? Because then it diffuses the defensive, and that has helped me twice. And
Oh.
there's always two sides of every
There's-
story. None of our children
that's
are
right.
perfect.
Because I've actually gotten into debates, like when
Yes.
the principal actually put me in contact with the
Yeah.
parent, and we actually got into a debate because it did, so I guess it just depends.
No,
Yeah.
totally.
Because it's how you see your child.
There's no one
Yeah.
right way to do this.
And there's no one truth. Everybody's,
Right.
there's two sides.
That
of it.
is
And it's your
really,
child, and you don't want to see your
Right.
child.
Anyway,
or something like
yeah.
Same thing I did, I said, this
Yeah.
is what my child says, I don't know if that's the whole truth.
Exactly.
Maybe you could talk to, Dylan or whatever and figure out, what's going on so that, cause that way they can work it out. And that way kind of lowers defense when you're not like accused towards like, this is what my child said, you may talk to your child, see what's going on, get his side of it, maybe you can try to work things out because Jackson's coming home upset, things like that. And, and I had to call a couple parents because sometimes they see one child bullying, right, and then there's others that join in because they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
fit in.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes kind of like a group thing where they're just picking on one child.
I think that in your situation, I don't know if your child's school has any kind of social groups. They'll have a lunch bunch group. I would check out any resources that are available. and Parent Education Advocacy Center here may have some resources for how to handle bullies. So, you know, I think that would be, we've got some.
What I have done, I have met almost all the staff in school.
Good.
Okay, so also the people that cleans the school, the people that are during lunchtime, everybody knows my kids and they keep an eye
Good.
on them.
Good, you're advocating for it.
So everybody knows.
Good,
And
yeah.
some way or another, I always know.
Yeah. I'm gonna move along. I want, interventions. I guess what I most wanna say about interventions are that, the tendency we have is, I don't know if any of you have had any of these psychological reports, neuropsychological reports that come back 27 pages long with long lists, pages and pages of recommendations. Does that sound familiar? Yes, yeah. I'm sorry. I've stopped doing that so much because if you get all, okay, so the child needs therapy, parents need therapy, child needs occupational therapy, child needs speech and language therapy, child needs tutoring for dysgraphia, did I miss anything? Medication, child needs, social group, okay? I think I covered it.
ABA.
Right, ABA or not ABA, you know, and you could end up spending your entire life and fortune on all of this. You and your child can end up in therapy every day after school. I am not a proponent of this. I think we have to prioritize what the interventions need to be. And I really think it is important to conserve resources, and by resources I mean time and money, both. So what are the priorities? And if I just had a psych eval or a neuropsych eval and I got this list, I would want you to ask, all right, prioritize these recommendations. We can't do all these right now. It's not realistic. ABA costs $10,000. I can't, I mean, at least that's an estimate I recently heard. So what I will tell you is I heard this many years ago from an expert at Johns Hopkins, and it has stuck in my head, that if there is depression among the diagnoses, that has to be treated first. That takes priority. Because until you have treated that, the child won't be able to do, you know, won't be able to make the best benefit of anything else. So I want that one is clear. I do not think it is helpful to have a child in therapy every day. I think that the number one thing children need after school is exercise. Exercise is the number one thing that anybody, any of us can do for our brains. And this is especially true, not especially true, it's true for children. Yes?
You speak to play and exercise because what I've noticed is myself included, we tend to put our kids in activities, which is to me the equivalent of, I mean, every day, which is to me the equivalent of like going to therapy every day. And I think that in my experience, what I've noticed the most is if I take my kids to the woods, then it's like free therapy.
Yep. Okay, yes.
Or
A
just
woman after my own heart,
unstructured
right.
play
Unstructured
with other
play.
kids.
Okay,
Where
so
they
this
can
is-
talk about
yeah.
how to get along and use iMessages and
This is the society
each
in
other
which you are
if they
living.
need to.
Right, in which the kids are, yes, and we are all busy and running around. And I think there are several things I can say to that topic. I used to give talks on stress in kids, stress in parents. And one of the things I learned doing that research was that the way kids reduce stress is through play, through free play, through time alone, building Legos, imaginative play, that's how they reduce stress. And that our kids are probably not getting enough of that. The other, in this society, because of, the drive to all of the activities. If you look at, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Dan Siegel and the Healthy Mind Platter. Is anybody familiar with him? He's a neuroscientist. He studied what you need to do to have a healthy mind. And he has it, I was just gonna draw it, but okay. He has it on, actually a platter. And the things you need to do a healthy mind, the first thing is exercise. The next thing is healthy diet. There is some research that says that there are certain food preservatives and chemicals that have been implicated with ADHD. Not the old Feingold diet, I'm not talking about that, but that, and then one mom asked me, does that mean go organic? And I said, it's not gonna hurt. So healthy exercise, healthy diet, and time in, he calls it, time in, not time out, but time in. And he talks about, one of the things we know from reducing stress is nature. And one of the things that is, was important to me about writing the book on emotional regulation was to find these kind of coping skills, and that is one of them, is how to regulate your emotions is to get out in nature. So I couldn't support you more in that children need free play, time, that's how they learn to reduce stress, and time outside, walking in the woods is probably one of the best things you could do for your kids, and for yourself, is my guess. I don't know if that addresses your, but these are all things that are true for all of us. I don't remember right now the rest of the things on his Healthy Mind Platter, but it's, you can Google it and find out. But they are basically learning meditation. These are, right, mindfulness, which has become, I know, right, okay, but it is effective, and it's been found to be very helpful. Okay, I'm thinking of all your questions. Okay. So just, one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that children need to be understood, listened to and understood. Mr. Rogers had a quote, which I had up on my webpage, I think it's on my Facebook page. Yeah, it is, which is Judith M Glasser PhD, about how the most important thing that we can do in life is to understand a child's feelings. And I think that is certainly one of the things that is most helpful. These are a lot of do nots. So I'm not gonna go through the do nots. Well, do not hit. Do not name call. There are those kinds of do nots. Do not lecture. There is no point. They tell me 12 words and then they've tuned you out. Forget it. There's no point. They do need listening to. And it can be really frustrating listening to a child with language-based learning disabilities and or ADHD because they have trouble organizing their thoughts. So sometimes you're just listening. And that is really important. The research on resilient children shows that even children with two schizophrenic parents can develop normally. And when they have found that, there was one adult in their lives who supported them and gave them a lot of love, which was often a grandmother, sometimes a teacher. So an understanding adult is extremely important. Okay. as you can tell, believe that understanding goes a long way to changing how we think and how we feel about ourselves. And so I do believe strongly in explaining diagnoses to the child. Oh well. It's being opposite.
Air, we got a draft.
Yeah, okay. So let me go through some other do's. I think learning firm discipline, kids need structure. I think that is critical. So to be firm and kind is very important. You decide what you're gonna do. You make the decision, you're the parent. And then follow through. Do not, please, ever threaten a consequence you have no intention of carrying out. Because that will just backfire on you. Create routines. Kids thrive on routines. And take time for training. That's one of the things about this 1, 2, 3 magic that I like, is that it's explained to children and you have to take time explaining it. And then you put it into practice, and the family works on it. And this is 123magic.com, and I do not get any benefits from any of this. Offer limited choices. I'm hearing and I'm seeing families where if the child doesn't like the dinner, the parents are making another dinner. And if the child doesn't like that dinner, the parents are making another dinner. And I don't comprehend this. I just, it's just not in my, you make dinner, you put food in front of them. If they're hungry, they eat it. If they're not hungry, they don't eat it. If they're hungry before they go to bed, they have a small bedtime snack, or they can have whatever, a leftover dinner, and they can have their dinner at, I'm not gonna put a kid to bed hungry. I don't wanna punish them, but logical consequences. So limited choices. I've had parents in my office like, where do you wanna stop, Chick-fil-A or Subway on the way home? One kid says one kid says the other, so the parent stops at both. Now, I'm sorry. We have to choose here. I'm not meaning to belittle or make fun of. I'm sorry if I sound that way. But, because a lot of us are just trying to cope, and I know that. But they do need limits. Using 12 words or less, that's very hard. Using listening, good listening skills, trying to understand. Inviting cooperation, trying to get cooperation. And this is hard, but I think a lot of teachers know how to do this instinctively. Creating games whenever you can. I have to take care of my 2-year-old on Saturday, and I'm already thinking of how I'm gonna get him to do what I need him to do. And so I've already been going through how creating games, like, let's see how many steps it can be till we get to the car. Who can get there first, those kinds of things. And making sure to take care of yourselves. That's probably the hardest one. I don't know if I have, so important about accurate diagnosis, I think, is very clear, I hope, from what I've said, that we've got to know what of all these things we've got, and things change over time, and as kids become teens, the diagnosis can change. These things are not static. The hormones come into play. Behavior management at home and at school, there's no one right answer to that. There are several good programs, 123 Magic being one, which is also for teachers. And then Alan Kasdan, he's the one up at the Yale Parenting Center, has another one, the Kasdan method, K-A-Z-D-I-N. These are some research-based. No one to do this though, but they do offer you strategies. And that is another whole lecture series. There's a guy over in Maryland who does do lecture series, Dan Shapiro, and he does good lecture series. The Parent-Child Journey is the name of his website, and books. Handling big emotions, those are coping skills. And those are the things like exercise, diet, listening to music, going for walks, going to nature, drawing, painting, talking to somebody, and most of what I've read on meltdowns is preventing them, trying to prevent them before they get big, and figuring out what the triggers are, what triggers the meltdown, and then trying to deal with it ahead of time, to be proactive. And then, of course, having to have a backup plan for when it doesn't work. What is normal versus abnormal behavior? When you have a psychological evaluation, one of the things that happens is that the test data is all compared against, your child's data is compared against a sample of same age, same gender peers. So that is one good way to find out if this is abnormal or normal. And then the hormonal changes in teenage years. I think those were the bulk of the questions that were asked, I think. Somebody asked about emotional intelligence, and I think that's dear to my heart. And that is why the book on empathy why I wrote that, because I feel very strongly emotional intelligence is the best predictor of success in life. Questions? Go ahead.
Can you just talk for a few minutes about the last point, in particular how to discuss it with a child?
That was a whole section of my talk. I would love to do that. Okay. This is something that, okay, so I actually got this idea from Michelle Garcia Winter, and I think she uses it for something else. But I love this idea. And, okay, I don't have, so what I do in my office is after I've done a testing, and I don't remember this, my tech guy did make this so that it would, okay, oh goody. Okay, so here's the way I handle this in my office, just to give you an example, is I take the results of testing, or whatever else you want to use. And I'm going to do myself here. I always do myself first, and because I like to make people laugh. So, okay, so, and even young children can understand this if I explain to them what a bar graph is. So, I'm going to chart on here the things I'm good at and the things I have trouble with, okay? And up at 5 is the things I'm really good at. And the things down here are the things I'm not so good at. So up here, what I know about myself is I have really good skills with words. I can do really well with anything having to do with words. I'm good at reading, I'm good at writing. Those things I'm pretty good at. I also have good artistic ability, musical ability more than art, but I can consider that sort of thing. My athletic ability, not so great. My something else, whatever I can come up with ability. And I'm using all kinds of, Michelle Garcia Winter calls it smarts. And she calls social stuff being social smarts, which I like. So it's just another one of these. My social smarts are pretty good. And then what I get to, I'll put attentional issues on here, where, and then for me, I always go down here and say, this is my visual spatial. And usually that gets a laugh. You guys are too tired. Then what I do, then I go through with them. And I say, here's what I learned about you. You've got really good, like me, or the other way, you've got really good visual spatial skills that I don't have. You puzzles together like nobody's business. You have really good whatever. You're an athlete. You're a really good athlete. You've got great social smarts. You have a little bit more difficulty, and I never do it low. I always say, you don't have anything like I do. And I never, maybe this is a lie, and you can, but I don't want a child to come out of my office demoralized. I want it the other way. So I'll say, you have a little bit more difficulty with focusing and concentrating. There may be some things we can do to help you with that. And that's gonna be up to the grown-ups. The grown-ups are gonna get together, mom and dad and I are gonna meet with your teachers and see what we can do to help with your being able to focus and pay better attention at school. Or if it's reading, whatever it is. I put this out on my listserv, and a lot of psychologists have developed their own method. I happen to like this one. So there's actually a book on it, I think, explaining test results. Did you have any follow-up question to that?
No, I'm just mostly looking for ideas. The whole concern is preventing demoralization.
Yes.
Helping them understand, and also making sure that doesn't become an excuse. And my son's a little young to worry about that, but as they get older, I'm worried about that.
Okay, those are things I'm often asked. First of all, I emphasize the strengths. And I don't refer to the others as weaknesses. I call them struggles. And maybe that's semantics, but I don't think it is.
It's like using a growth mindset instead of using a growth mindset
Yes,
instead of focusing
that's right.
on it.
Thank you. Yeah, if it's not, and weakness implies, I actually can learn how to get out of here. I just have to find, anyway, you get the idea. But in terms of what was the other point? The not crutch, to use it as a crutch? Well, I think of crutches as something we need when our legs are broken. And then we get rid of it when we don't need it anymore. So it does have to be explained in terms of this is not an excuse. It means you are going to have to work harder. And we're going to recognize that you have to work harder. That for some people, there are probably some things that come easily to you that other people have to work hard at. But that's what this means. I do have stories I tell in my office when that comes up about people who have overcome great adversity. And I'm sure you can find them. That they didn't stop just because they had, there's Paralympic athletes who have overcome great, anything like that you can find. But to recognize that the child is having to work harder and will have to. It actually serves them well, believe it or not. I'm gonna take, a couple more questions, or it's, okay, and then. Yeah.
So you have a slide here about reevaluation, and you also talked about ADHD. So a couple of nights ago, I was in a lecture about addiction, and it was really heartbreaking because it was a young person who was talking about that.
Oh.
But he was explaining how he does have ADHD, and he was selling his pills to get money.
Yeah.
So, and you're talking about the myths. So it basically made me think very carefully, like, what happens if my child who takes ADHD pills, because it's nonverbal and so it was not evaluated correctly, the diagnosis is not correct. So what is a good diagnosis, you would say, like, what is a good pathway for a parent to feel like this was really a good diagnosis in ADHD?
Yeah, the things that I have difficulty with, now, not everybody can afford them. This is the problem. A good evaluation is gonna be a psychological evaluation. I don't.
For ADHD?
Yeah. I don't necessarily think the neuropsychological evaluations are necessary for, those tend to be more comprehensive, more thorough, things that we might use for brain injury, in my opinion, you're getting my opinion, okay? And they tend to be much more expensive. But the thing that you can have the symptoms of ADHD for many different reasons. You can be restless and fidgety if you're not understanding what the teacher's talking about. What is happening a lot, I think, is that pediatricians, I'm not blaming, pediatricians are handing out the Vanderbilt questionnaire to parents and teachers, and based on that questionnaire, are prescribing medication.
Correct.
I have a problem with that.
So what would you do? Because that's what we got.
If it's helping,
I honestly don't think so, but again, he's nonverbal, so it's so hard to understand.
So my personal opinion is he needs an evaluation by somebody who knows how to evaluate a nonverbal child.
Evaluation on ADHD.
I believe that we don't know that he's got the symptoms of ADHD, but we don't know why. Why does he have those symptoms? Is it the neurobiological disorder ADHD, or is it something else? Is it, what's causing him to be nonverbal?
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's where, and I don't know to what extent, I don't know the answer to whether the public schools are equipped, given this time of financial, limitation, to what extent schools can do this anymore. I don't know if you.
Well, I mean, the evaluations that are done within Arlington schools are under the umbrella of special education, and they are completed by school psychologists. Now, I would say, having been a school psychologist here for many years, that we're looking at educationally relevant data, and I have felt that in my experience, the psychologists here do a good job in completing full psychologicals. But as you said, Dr. Glasser, sometimes we have very complicated little ones, and sometimes with all that we can do, sometimes there are things outside of what a school psychologist can do. Full disclosure. But I do think that the instruments that we use, or that I used to use, are what most psychologists in the outside world do. But it's just under a very different umbrella.
Yeah. So that might be a way to get some help. I thought. Okay.
And also, the thing I was thinking about, I never let the pediatrician do the diagnosis. I asked for her to refer me to a developmental doctor and to a psychologist. And after that, we have the diagnosis. So, because the pediatrician is not the expert in that area.
There was another question, I think, and then that's the last one. Was there another question over here? I thought I saw a hand.
Can we put a plug in for something? For parents with siblings, the Super Sibs Club.
Oh.
It's awesome.
Callie and Kathleen do the Super Sibs Club 2 through 5, grades 2 through 5 for siblings, right? And 6 through 8, and we're starting middle school.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Cool.
I have a child that's involved with it, and it's been great for her STEAM.
Good.
Yeah.
That's very
Great
needed.
program, so
Very needed.
keep that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's not too late to attend this year, there's been 2 sessions for the littles, and there's gonna be one in March, the next one's in March 19th. When's the middle school one?
February 27th.
Yeah, I can speak personally. My younger son has found it really helpful to meet other peers who, have a sibling that has a learning difference. And so having a safe place to talk about how he feels has been really cool. And he's only in 2nd grade, so I'm grateful for
great.
that experience.
That's great. Lots of good things going on. Thank you all. Thanks for your attention. I appreciate it.